This is Casey's Corner, where we review games of the video, board, and book variety. Today we're going to be reviewing Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn. Now, I know this game came out over a year ago, but I played the original Final Fantasy XIV, and it sucked really bad. And I couldn't bring myself to touch this copy until a few of my friends made me. And now that they have, I love them for it ever much more. Now, they changed a lot in this version, but they kept some of the favorite things around still. The first and foremost thing they kept around is the Kokoboos. It's the only game I know that lets you ride a giant chicken and makes it cool. But what they've added is a bunch of bardings and also a various amount of other mounts. So if you get bored with or don't like riding the giant cool chickens, you've got your selections. The other really cool things that they've brought into this is multi-platforming. They have it on the PS4, like this copy, the PS3, and also, as always, on PCs. But it's the only game that I've played, the MMO, that has console versions that actually allows cross-platform communications. When you log on, you're playing with people on the PS3, PS4, and PC all together. They don't separate the worlds or the servers. So if you've got a friend who likes playing on the PC, but you'd prefer to play on the console, this game actually gives you the availability for both of you to play the platforms you prefer. Now, that brings us to the actual gameplay. Now, the main quests in this do something that a lot of the MMOs nowadays have been trying to do, but I don't think any have actually succeeded at until this. Making the main story quest feel like a first-player, single-player game. Each segment of the quest makes you feel like you're accomplishing something and finding this end story and solving this great mystery. And it feels like, until you're doing the dungeon portions, that you can do this completely alone or with friends, but the way the quests are done and the way they do their cutscenes makes you really feel like you're playing a Final Fantasy game. But there is no lack of side quests. Every town you have to hit, and there's a lot of towns, to do the main quest, has dozens of side quests for you to do to distract yourself. And there's even entire sections of the world that the main storyline never touches, that you can go out at your level and discover and explore and find even more side quests. The game in and of itself endorses exploration. You can stick with the main storyline, you'll be happy with your levels, you'll get all the way to the cap, but if you explore, you're going to get more rewards and more levels out of it. Now, next I'd like to talk about the races, because they kept all the races from the original Final Fantasy XIV, but they revamped their looks and appeals to bring them to, honestly, the next gen. In my opinion, the PS4 is one of the best platforms to play this on, because you can really get to see the work they put into these characters. Now, there's 6 races, and the first is the Hyr, or Hyrer, or however you pronounce it. And it's basically they're humans. And every race is broken into 2 different clans. One clan is made for your fighting classes, and the other clan is made for your casting classes. Now, the races don't determine where you start, they're just the look of your character. When you want to min-max it, there's best races for it and all that, but the beginning stats and your end stats are so massively different that it really doesn't matter. It's all about the look and the feel of what you want your character to be. The heroes, the humans, have a very realistic appeal. They did everything they could to make these people look real. They didn't go for the sci-fi humans and the overly sexy humans. They saved different races for that. These humans are humans that you think, well, you know, of course handsome, because you don't want to play anybody ugly. These are people you'd watch on TV. That brings us to the Elzen. They're elves, which are different from any other world's elves I've ever seen. They tried to make them look alien and majestic and regal. And in some points they seem to have succeeded in this. I don't know if I'm really feeling the Elzen personally, but I can see their appeal for a lot of other players. Next is the Mikote, which they obviously just tried to go for the sexy element. The game tries to tag to everyone's opinions and everyone's likes and preferences, and they really, with their races, run the gamut here. The Mikote go out of their way, when you look at their garb, by showing midriff and cleavage and everything else, to be overly sexy. If you want to play the sexy person running around getting everybody's attention, this is your race. Next are the Rogadin, which are their giants, their brutes. Every game has to have their thug, and this is it. But they do go into, with the facial features, making these thugs more personable, more approachable. You don't get the monstrous feel from them, just the, you don't want to meet them in a dark alley when they're very angry feel. And finally, you have the Lalafell, which are one of my personal favorites. They are just adorable. They're like pudgy baby elves that run around and hurl fireballs or swing swords, and it's amazing to watch. And it's amazing to play, and it's adorable. I love the Lalafell, if you can't tell. Now, as I've said before, the world is extremely expansive. But what I like about the world is, while there are dozens of zones and dozens of areas to explore and look at, and trust me, you'll want to look. The graphics in this are just beautiful. They've kept it to 3 main areas and a few smaller areas. Each area has 5 to 7 zones, and even the zones themselves are broken up into multi-level platforms. So you'll find yourself coming back to zones that you've already done and finding new and amazing things about them. And in each zone, of course, at least has 1 dungeon. And these dungeons are far and beyond, in my opinion, the most creative that I've ever played. You don't have this linear feel to it. Well, there is a linear quest, and you're trying to get from point A to point B, of course. These dungeons, they've succeeded in creating these dungeons into twisting caverns and labyrinths that, until you've played them repeatedly, it's quite easy to get lost in. And they've added timers. Now, these timers usually have anywhere between 70 and 120 minutes on them, which, in all honesty, is way more than enough time to get these dungeons done. But when you're lost, trying to find the way through and fighting all these monsters along your way, and you don't know where you're going, and you look at that clock and it's ticking down, it does add this large sense of urgency. And one thing they've added to dungeons, well, not added to the dungeons, but added as dungeons, are the larger boss battles. In other MMOs, I'm not going to name any names right now, to get to a massive boss fight, you have to play through a horrendous raid or dungeon that can leave the fight in the end feeling a little forced or strained, because you've already gone through half an hour to an hour of just getting to this thing. And then because it's a boss, it's going to take you another half hour to fight. And so you're looking at a large investment of time that can get quite grueling. In this, they have their set number of larger bosses, but most of them have their own arenas. When you initiate the fight, you start out fighting the boss, and you do a massive fight against the boss. Now, they've taken some guidelines here from other games in their combat, in that they do offer some movement necessities. They have conal, radial, and line attacks from the big monsters and little monsters that require you to constantly be paying attention to your fights so that you don't get hit by these massive blows. An easy, same level fight can turn into a life or death struggle if you just refuse to move at the wrong time. But the biggest draw of this game I've saved for last. It's their character level process. So they start out with 8 starting classes. 5 classes for the art of the Disciples of the Hand. No, sorry, Disciples of War. And 3 for the Disciples of Magic. Now, each of these leads to a job, and I could spend an entire half an hour explaining the job system and the level system. But the long story short of the versatility is, they've created a game where if you don't care about the aesthetics of a character or the character you're playing, per se, as in the race and such, you never have to make more than 1 character to play this game. Because when you pick your starting class, once you hit level 10 in that, you can take any of the other classes you want, and all you have to do is switch your main tool. This allows you to take every single class to the level cap of 50 if you want, and pick up every job that they have, which is what I was talking about before, the multi-class that they provide, and you can take them all the way up to 50, including the crafting classes, which are done completely different than any other game. They're treated as a class in and of themselves. When you pick up the main tool in your main hand, you become a level 1 of that crafting class. And you have to level it up just like everything else. And you gain experience from doing crafting quests and crafting items, as well as their gathering is done the same way. And you can level all of these things and all of your character classes up to 50, making it only a personal choice if you want to play multiple characters. And that's something a lot of other games don't bother doing. They pigeon-toe you on purpose to make you make multiple characters. And I really like that Sony Entertainment here has decided we're not going to do that to our players anymore. Our players are going to be allowed to be whatever they want, whenever they want. If they usually like playing a tank, then they can play a tank. But if their group's lacking a healer, and they've taken the time to level it up, they can switch over to one of the healer classes. And there's no negatives, there's no downsides, and there's no ill effects of that switch. It is amazing to know that if you take the time to level all the classes up, you can be whatever you want to be and whatever you need to be when you need to be it. Now, like all games, it does have a few downsides. The first of these is the length of time that you have to wait to do what other games basically consider common first level activities. You unlock the auction house in your bank through what they call retainers. And they're these NPCs that come out and they hold stuff for you and they sell stuff for you on the auction house. But you have to wait until around level 20, 18 to 20, to get one of these, which means there's no bank and there's no selling your stuff until that point. So if you're one of those people who likes to do multiple classes, your inventory can fill up pretty darn quick. And you just kind of have to wait until your main class gets all the way through the main quest far enough to get your retainer. The second is the wait for dungeons. Dungeons can take, especially if you're playing DPS, which I like to play, can take upwards of an hour in waiting in queue to get. There's only 2 tank classes and 2 healer classes, while there is something like 8, including the jobs, DPS classes. So DPS outnumbers the healing and the tanks by a lot. And so you run into a gap where if you're not playing a tank or you're not playing a healer, you're going to be waiting for a very long time for your dungeons. Now, this isn't always true. Sometimes the average wait time it tells you is exactly the average wait time that you'll wait. But in my experience as a DPS, you usually have to double about what it says the average wait time is. And I haven't started a dungeon yet that hasn't had an average wait time under 15 minutes. So, that brings me to the last thing, which is the travel and costs. Now, they understand they have an expansive and beautiful world, and they want you to see as much of it as possible. So the main story quest is going to be taking you from zone to zone to zone. And at some points, you're going to be going from area to area so quickly that you're spending more time traveling to these areas than you are actually in them to do these quest elements. Now, I wouldn't normally have a problem with that because very quickly, early on in the game, they give you a teleport spell, which allows you to teleport to any zone that you've unlocked by attaching to its local Aether Stone. But going between the 3 major nations costs a pretty penny each time you teleport, rendering it much more cost-effective, especially at low levels, to take the airships or other modes of transit. The problem is you have to travel to those 2 because they only have 1 airship location per faction. And that becomes a problem. If you're out in the middle of nowhere doing a portion of the main storyline quest, and you have to go to another zone, and you don't want to pay the multiple teleport costs, or the 1 large teleport cost it would cost to get you out there, you're looking for a long travel back to town to get on the airship, to do a long travel back out to wherever you need to be for your quest. And it seems the later on as you get in the game, the more they want you to travel between these nations. And while that's awesome and it's very realistic, in game terms, it either takes a lot of your money or a lot of your time. And you really have to start making a judgment call on which is more important to you. But these are three very small things in comparison to a game that is just leagues in advance to its previous incarnation. I'd like to say that of all of the problems I may have with this game, they are dwarfed completely by the actual game itself. And when they said they would make a Realm Reborn and redo Final Fantasy XIV to a way that people would love it, they were completely right. They took in all of our notes, they took in all of our complaints, and they made a game that I can say I love playing. So, leave us your comments below. Please subscribe, and check out our other shows, nerdRANTs, nerdRage, and nerdgasm. Now, the links will either be here, here, or here. I'll Vanna White it for you. Or if my producer's feeling funny, they'll be somewhere over here. Now, I've covered all four directions, so my producer can't screw me over. Check us out. I host another show called nerdRANT, where four of us get up here and yell at each other for a while, and it can be pretty humorous if you give us a chance. Thank you for all your comments, and we'll see you next week.